Who are you? What's your name and what do you do?
So my name is Beth Benalloul, and I'm a real estate broker at the Corcoran Group.
What do you do for a living? You're a real estate broker?
Yeah, I'm a real estate broker, so I sell residential real estate in New York City, condos, co-ops, townhomes, new developments. Really, that's the basis of it.
You started off as a personal trainer for one of the top 25 NYC brokers. How did you say one day that I'm going to become a real estate broker like, my client is?
So I guess what happened was, I've been doing this now for over it's about 21 years. And when I first got into the business, I sort of got into it personally because my husband and I were looking for an apartment for ourselves. So I started looking and I started really liking it. And I was kind of looking for a career change at that point because I had started to have kids and I just wanted something a little bit different, like change of pace. And I think when I first got into the business, I thought, oh, maybe I'll do this part time, maybe I'll help friends. And it just sort of spiraled and it became like a very, very full time, 24-hour, 7 day a week business.
So you
So,
you didn't go into it thinking I'm going to become like top broker.
not at all. Not at all. I went into it like, thinking like this could be an interesting career. I found it fascinating. I loved seeing apartments. I loved helping people.
And
You
did
know,
you, sorry,
no, I said even before I was doing this, like I was in a business helping other people. So it was always sort of like, my passion to do that.
natural progression, you would say.
Exactly.
Would you say what made you hit the $1 million club in your first year was those conversations with your client as a personal trainer? Or would you say that was something else?
No, look, obviously any business, it's like it's hard work and it's sort of what you put into it. In my first year, I was obviously, somewhat green because, anyone in their first year is somewhat green and you're learning the ropes. But I was always very hardworking and I definitely was able to tap into some of my personal training clients and get them as buyers and sellers. So I think that helped and sort of my connections with that. But and over the years, in fact, I have a client I'm working with now who was at one time one of my personal training clients over 20 years ago. So things do come sort of full circle. And now I'm helping her daughter find an apartment, and her daughter was like a really young child when we were working together. So it's an interesting sort of life cycle business. Um, but I don't know that it had anything to do, with my first year. Again, I was always sitting on open houses trying to get people to work with me, and eventually, like it just clicked.
So, how did, I don't know, what was the most interesting experience? Like you're sitting across from your client as a personal trainer and they're like, "Can I?" And you're like, "Can I sell your house?" Like if you put yourself in their perspective, like, it'd be insane. But how did you close a client like that?
Well, I guess it was sort of a transition because once I started doing real estate, I wasn't really working as personal training anymore.
Sure.
So, at that point, I was, it was almost like a year or two had passed before I was doing that. So I think the truth is they were like eager to help me when they knew that I was getting into the business. It wasn't like I had to really sell myself to them. They knew me, they trusted me. At the end, like this business is all about trust and relationships and, you know, people wanting to work with you, right? There's a lot of brokers out there, so they could technically work with anyone they want. But if they like you and they trust you, and, you know, I think that's half the battle.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you've been at Corcoran your whole career. Why
Yes.
why stay at one brokerage? Because, most agents will switch between a couple of different brokerages. But you
Yeah. And look, obviously, over the years, I've thought about leaving and going to a different brokerage house. But at the end, I've always really liked Corcoran. And I've always felt that it was like a very respectable brand, probably the most respected sort of out there in my mind. The other thing is, I think it like casts a wide net. So I do a lot of new development. I work with developers in addition to my resale clients. And not all brokerages have such a strong sort of new development platform. So for me, that was important to have that sort of within the same umbrella. So I kind of always felt like I had the best of both worlds because I had the resources to work with developers, but at the same time, I can work with a resale co-op client on Park Avenue and be able to give them the support of a big brokerage firm. Obviously, over the years, a lot of brokers switch and they go from one to another to another. And at the end, like, I just don't know if there's a benefit of switching. I think it's sort of what you make it, right? And if you're happy where you are, there's no point to mess that up.
When you sell a new development property, you're selling mainly to landlord, like not landlords, but developers to let them, sell your
Well, you
property
sell
out.
for a developer, so
Yeah,
it's not to a developer. It would be to an end user.
but you
But
have
if
to convince them to let you sell their property, pretty much, right? Or
Yeah, so like a developer would have an entire building to sell, and you would pitch them, and then you would sell the building on their behalf.
so, how do you go from selling, to random people, or not, maybe not random, but relationship driven to I'm gonna go pitch this development,
So
developer.
obviously that's a good question, and that takes time. And I think, you sort of build up to it. So the way that I started was that I would take what I call like leftovers of a building. So, once a developer, let's say he sells a building out with 100 units, obviously at the end, you might have 8 units left, 10 units left. The majority of the building is sold. But then at the end, there'll always be like some units that remain. So what I did over the years, I used to try to take the leftovers and I would sell out the balance of those units. And then eventually those clients, when they start to do a new building, sometimes they transition and instead of bringing in a sales team, they'll bring in like what we call a resale broker to sell the units for them. So you're not necessarily like on staff, but you do all the appointments and you sell out the entirety of the building.
What would you say makes Manhattan luxury real estate different than any other market?
Well, it's probably much more expensive for one. um, I would say, look, I think people who buy Manhattan real estate, like there's so many reasons why people buy it. Um, I think obviously you have people that come to the city and this New York City in itself is a big attraction and wanting to own a piece of New York City. I think that you have obviously spectacular views. Some of the buildings that we sell have amazing amenities. So you can be in a luxury condominium tower with a swimming pool and a basketball court or a movie theater or things that, you don't get probably in other buildings in other locations. Um, and look, I think also just the competition, the amount of buildings that we have, unless you're in a larger city, like you're not going to have so many high rises in one sort of condensed area. So I think that leads developers to sort of compete with each other of better finishes, better views, better, this, that, and the other to try to lure buyers in.
Mamdani recently initiated a tax where they're taxing second homes over $5 million.
Yeah.
How would you say that you foresee this affecting the real estate market and real estate as a whole in New York City?
So definitely a very hot subject right now and a very tense subject, I should say. I
If you
think
prefer
it's
to not answer, let
no,
me.
no, no, I don't mind
Yeah.
answering at all. I think it's a very short-sighted tax. And I also think it's like very hard to sort of apply that tax. Like, what exactly, where is he getting his valuation from? Number one, does this affect anyone who's bought ever, like, and doesn't use their apartment full time? Does it affect, obviously real estate fluctuates. What if one day your apartment's worth 4.9 and the next year it's worth 5.2? Do you pay the tax some year, not other years? And I think it's short sighted because I think it will slow the market down. And I don't know how many people know this, but on every transaction, the city is making a large sum of money on transactions alone. So, when they close a sale, they make a mansion tax, they make a city and state transfer tax. Um, they collect property taxes. Typically, someone with a second home isn't using our services. So you're collecting a tax on a property. The kids don't go to school here. They don't drive on the roads here. They don't, use any of our services. So it's like you're going to eliminate collecting all those transfer taxes to maybe collect a small sum. I think it would take you years to offset what you will lose in transfer fees by a pied a terre tax that I think will be very hard to collect and very hard to sort of like figure out who owes what. And I think once that would happen, you would have workarounds. People would rent the apartments out. Is that then it's an investment property, not a pied a terre? I mean, there's so many complications. I think it's really like a desperate thing.
Yeah, I think one of the things around the tax code is that like if you're smart enough, there are workarounds for pretty much everything. Like I think
Yeah.
a bunch of people pay zero in tax, but how do you stop yourself from being complacent? Because you pretty much had a trajectory that was pretty quick to the top. How do you stop yourself from getting complacent where you're at?
It's just like, I think in order to be successful in this type of business, you can't be complacent because it's like you're only as good as your last sale and you have to sort of stay on it 24/7. Um, because, in a sense, like sometimes I feel like I wake up every day and I'm unemployed, right? I have to like go out and get new business because once you sign a deal or once you sell an apartment, like you need to get the next one in line. You need to get the next buyer ready, the next sale. So it's not, I wouldn't suggest someone going into this business if they're not like ready for that chase.
What's the most expensive house that you or home that you've ever sold?
37 million.
What do you learn from people just the way by the way they act who buy $37 million properties?
I mean, I'll be honest with you, someone who buys a $37 million property is usually much easier to work with than someone who buys a $1.5 million property. When you're dealing with those numbers, I find that oftentimes it's more of a transaction to them and sometimes either less emotional or their level of efficiency is better. I'm dealing with somebody now who's selling a fairly small apartment and they're, for lack of a better word, they're very high maintenance. um, so I just think sometimes when you're dealing with people who have more, it's, I don't want to say less emotional because a residential purchase is an emotional purchase, but they're just able to transact at a faster pace and usually with less like drama surrounding it.
There's two agents who brokers who I think you might know. One is Bob Benalloul, and he actually said that um, because I asked him the same question, what's the largest property you've done?
Yeah.
Did like a something close to a billion or I think a billion five. I could be wrong. And he was like, it's actually easier to close the
Yeah.
billion-dollar properties. Of course, he's doing commercial real estate, but it's
Yeah.
easier to close the billion-dollar properties than it is to close, small $20 million. It's not small,
Yeah.
but because everybody at that level who's doing them knows what they're doing.
Yeah. So
And
residential, I think would be the same. Like sometimes the larger deals, like it's just they're smoother. But unfortunately, the larger deals are further and fewer and farther between.
how do you meet somebody or how do you become an agent of somebody who's buying a $37 million property?
I think it's time, and I think it's just like, it's the grind. I don't think there's any real immediate, like it's hard for me to answer that, right? Because I would say it could come to you in many different ways, right? It could come to you from a listing that you had. I sometimes show properties that are of that level. And sometimes you'll get a buyer who comes in, they don't want to buy that particular property, but you can take them to see another property. Um, I've had people, quite frankly, who were friends of mine who I sold them apartments of $3, $4 million, 12, 15 years ago, who have done exceedingly well for themselves and, bought things 30 million range. But they were, clients of mine when they were buying something at 3.7. So you can have some of that. Um, and then of course referrals, a friend of a friend who knows somebody who again is extremely wealthy and they send them your way, and so that's another way. So I think there's various avenues to get there. um and one time someone said to me, like, you just have to be in the game, and eventually, like, things do come to you, and obviously I'm doing this now for quite a while. Most people know that I do this and respect me and trust me. So, they do send me that business.
What, who's the most successful person you've met, and what did they teach you?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I've met so many successful people over the years. Um, I would say that, um, wow. Um, Hold on one sec. I'm sorry. Um, I mean, I'm lucky because I've been able to work with people who, um, again, like even people I know who've done exceedingly well for themselves, whether it's a hedge fund manager. I mean, I've shown apartments to major CEOs of companies that I'm like wowed by, or, even Pam Liebman, like she's our CEO of our company and she's really, super successful and I consider her a friend. And I mean, there's just so many people like over the years who I've shown to that have been, I don't want to say I'm starstruck by them. And certainly I can't really give you their names because they're names that you would probably know. So that's, not right. But there have been a number of them, whether they're in the sports and entertainment business or they're politically connected or, the head of a pharmaceutical company or the head of, you know, um, hedge funds, that's a big one.
If you were to buy an apartment in NYC, which neighborhood would you say is you're going to get the best bang for your buck?
Probably the Upper East Side.
What would be the top, what are the top five neighborhoods for somebody to move into in New York City if they're looking to get the best bang for their buck?
Well, I think bang for your buck and top five neighborhoods are not necessarily together, right? So you get a lot of people, and again, everything has a certain budget and threshold, but you have people that only want to be downtown, right? So they want to be West Village or Tribeca or things like that, and that's a very, very hot area and obviously expensive area because it's desirable. And then you have people that want to be close to Central Park. So they want close proximity to schools, close proximity to the park. So they're going to, sort of flock up to the Upper East Side or the Upper West Side. And so those become more desirable neighborhoods because you're near schools, you can walk, you're near, the areas feel more residential, they are clean, things like that. And that's obviously important to a lot of buyers. But like, it's almost like New York City today, in my mind, there's so many desirable areas that it's hard to pinpoint. And sometimes, someone will sort of gravitate towards a neighborhood because it's close to where they work or, close to where they're going to have to commute every single day. Um, or quite frankly, a friend lives there, which I always find weird, but like they'll be like, oh, we have a friend from Texas who also lives in this area. So we want to live there, or whatever. So yeah, so that's the thing.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Um, Look, obviously at the end I sell real estate, but it's a sales job, which can be very, very discouraging, right? A sales job is like a roller coaster. It's up and it's down, and you just got to be able to like stay on it and have grit because you're going to have days where you're like, "Oh my God, I don't think I can do this. I'm never going to make a deal again. Like I'm going out of business." And but it does turn around and like you just got to always like stay positive.
What's the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, worst? Oh God. That's a tough one. I probably would have forgotten it because it was a bad piece of advice. Um, Sometimes you'll have sellers that'll tell you like check in with the buyer, chase down the buyer. And like one thing I always have noticed, and again, after many, years of experience doing this, is that like when you have somebody that wants something that they want to buy it, you don't really have to chase them down. They come to you. The same way they came to you when they wanted to see the property, they know how to find you when they want to buy the property. So I think that's like a common misconception. And a lot of sellers will say, oh, did you call this one? Did you follow up with this one? Did you tell them we already had an offer? Did you do this? But like at the end, like usually the person they're telling you to do that to just isn't interested.
If you were 18 today, would you go back into real estate?
I would, but again, you have to be willing to sort of, you know, it's obviously a changing business and a changing industry as most industries are. But even though with like the invention of AI, I really don't see that this business will, I think there'll be realtors for at least 10 years out because it really is a personal, industry. And I think, despite computers helping and AI helping, I do think that people still want a personal touch, and they want to speak to someone and have that person hold their hand and be their therapist and, just sort of assure them that everything's going to go the right way. And, get an opinion of somebody. So I think yes is the answer. I would go back into this industry.
What is one thing you would wish that you had told your younger self?
Don't worry so much about like what's next because like you spend a lot of time worrying and being impatient and things do tend to work themselves out.
Thank you so much for joining me. Where
You're
can
welcome.